Hey, how's it going, guys? As part of my second World Cup Series episode, I decided to dedicate this episode to the 2002 World Cup. But unlike in the previous video about the 1994 World Cup, which was my first episode in the series, I found it to be very clunky and disjointed. I mean, I was talking in depth about certain things like Bulgaria's lucky streak, and then almost nothing in some other places. Like, for example, the final between Italy and Brazil, which was the first in the World Cup history to go into penalties. So I think I'm gonna mix things up a little bit in this video, change my style. Instead, I'm just gonna do a more traditional type structure where I just talk about the intro and the background and then go straight into the games before delving into the confusion and what can be gathered from this World Cup. I think that'll be a lot better for my personal style of doing things. Okay, so anyway, let's get down to it. Now, the thing about the 2000 World Cup, which you need to know, is that it'll probably be best known for Irish expulsions, strange haircuts, especially for the one Brazilian player and the one Turkish player, the 3 Rs, all three for the Brazilian team, and what I consider to be the greatest redemption arc in World Cup football history, like ever. This World Cup also saw the debuts of Senegal, Ecuador, and China. Neither Ecuador or China will do particularly well in this World Cup, and China, in fact, won't make it to any other World Cup so far. It hasn't even been to this World Cup, even though it has expanded to 48 teams. But the Senegal, which I'll talk to you a little bit more about later, will really impress in this World Cup. So let's get to the actual gameplay itself. So in Group A, we have France, Senegal, Uruguay, and Denmark. Now, the most shocking thing about this group is that France lost against Senegal, Uruguay, and Denmark, which is kind of shocking because they won the previous World Cup for like the first time ever. And I don't think quite that any other team in history have won the World Cup in one World Cup and did so spectacularly bad in the other World Cup. I think I may be wrong, but in this specific World Cup, specifically in the modern history of the World Cup, I think France is definitely on the top of the list. So in Group B, we have Spain, Paraguay, South Africa, and Slovenia. Spain won against all of those teams to top the group. And I guess you could say this is sort of a taster for things to come in the World Cup 8 years later when Spain actually won the World Cup for the first time. But that's for another video. For this one, we see Spain top the group and actually becoming good because while Spain have been to every World Cup consistently since 1978 and some before then, it's been a little hit and miss for them. But Spain are really coming into their own in this World Cup, but it'll take them another two for them to really hit their stride and finally win a World Cup. To be continued. So in Group C, we have Brazil and Turkey, Costa Rica, and China. Now, the thing about Brazil, which you need to understand, is that while they were still a very good World Cup team in this World Cup, I mean, they won this World Cup, so why wouldn't they be good? But in the months running up to this World Cup, they weren't really as good as they used to be. Certainly not as good as in 1994, initially at least. And there were doubts as to whether they would even be in this World Cup. If they didn't, it'll be the first time they ever didn't go to a World Cup. Of course, they managed to qualify, thank God, and they showed that they're actually still quite a good team against Turkey, Costa Rica, and China. A funny thing about the Brazilian team is that a lot of criticism has been levied at Ronaldo in particular. First of all, because of the seizure he had in the previous World Cup, and then he had a massive injury which prevented him from playing football for like a year. And there were people who thought that Ronaldo wouldn't be at his best. But then he decided to distract from that by, well, first playing excellent football and then shaving his head in a weird hairstyle where just a patch of his head is at the front. That became a kind of a cornerstone for this World Cup. Now in Group E, you have Germany, Cameroon, Saudi Arabia, and Ireland. They won two of the games against Cameroon and Saudi Arabia, unsurprisingly, but somewhat surprisingly, drew against Ireland. And this is despite the fact that Roy Keane had just been expelled from the Irish team for basically insulting the Irish team manager to his face, which is kind of funny. And the Irish team manager, by the way, a guy named Mick McCarthy, was actually part of the Irish team in 1990 when they did a similar good job. And it was actually the first time they ever been to the World Cup in 1990. So that's a cool fact there. Now in Group F, you have Argentina, England, and Sweden, and another country, right? So the funny thing about this one was that Argentina was actually eliminated completely from the competition, while still in the group stages, which is a far cry from 20 years later, obviously. They lost to England and they drew Sweden, which unfortunately wasn't enough for them to advance to the next round. Of course, they didn't have Messi, and this was actually the last World Cup without either Messi or Ronaldo. So then we get to Group G, where we have Italy, Croatia, Ecuador, and Mexico. Now, Italy were actually beat by Croatia, but they managed to beat Ecuador and Mexico, although surprisingly, it was Mexico who ended up topping the group. And then we get to Group H, where we have Japan and Korea. We have Japan and Belgium. Now, both Japan and Korea managed to top their group stages for the first time in World Cup history. Yes, of course, this was hosted in Asia, so they have the home advantage, but it's still quite good for a team that only made their debut in the previous World Cup. So now let's get to the round of 16. So in the round of 16, we have Brazil beat Belgium, unsurprisingly. Belgium were actually getting to be quite good, but they were still a far cry off from the golden generation that we saw in the 2010s, particularly the 2010 World Cup. I still remember when they beat us in the third place playoff. Still a little sore from that. And then we get England beating Sweden, which is ironic because England at the time had their first foreign manager, Sven-Göran Eriksson, who actually was Swedish, so a bit of irony there. Then we have South Korea beating Italy with Sol Ki-hyun's equalizer being won by the golden goal. Now, the thing about Sol Ki-hyun is that not only is he one of the best South Korean football players of all time, but he's also the first Korean to ever score a goal in the Champions League, and I think even the first Korean to be in the Premier League, or at least one of the first. So that's cool. And then Spain against Ireland. Spain actually won this one, but they almost didn't win because Ireland actually equalized Spain's first goal by Robbie Keane, who was Roy Keane's brother. But Spain ended up winning on penalties anyway, so I guess that's good because I support Spain as opposed to Ireland. And then Germany beat Paraguay 1-0, USA beat Mexico 2-0, Senegal beat Sweden on penalties, Turkey beat Japan 1-0, and that's pretty much it for the round of 16. Now in the quarterfinals, Brazil beat England 2-1. I actually remember my parents telling me a story about this because they were both in university at the time, and one of their best friends at the university was a Brazilian foreign student. Most of the students there were foreigners, including my parents, so not surprising there. And also, unsurprisingly, it was the Brazilian who was for the Brazilians, and he was so excited, according to my parents, when Brazil beat England, and my parents, not so much. And of course, it was Ronaldinho who scored the winning goal, and this is the first World Cup that Ronaldinho was at. He was the best young player at this specific World Cup, and it was in this World Cup where the 3 R's, so to speak, were fully utilized, that being Ronaldinho, Ronaldo, and Rivaldo. Elsewhere, Turkey beat Senegal, and Germany beat the USA 1-0. And finally, South Korea beat Spain, which is kind of shocking because it's Spain. They weren't quite the World Cup team they became later in the decade, but they were still better than South Korea, at least in my opinion. But nevertheless, South Korea managed to become the first ever Asian country to reach the semifinals, which I guess is as cool as when Morocco, 20 years later, became the first African team to reach semifinals. It's kind of like that. So in the semifinals, Brazil beat Turkey, although Turkey shouldn't feel too bad about that because they are, after all, this was their first ever World Cup semifinal, and they did in this World Cup become the first ever Muslim country to go into the semifinals. Morocco became the second. Some people say that Morocco is the first Muslim country. No, it's Turkey first and then Morocco. And then finally, Germany beat South Korea, because if Germany was beaten by South Korea, I'd cry foul of this because something's not right. And then finally, we get to the finals. Before then, we have a third place match between Turkey and South Korea, won by Turkey. So basically, South Korea are the Bulgarians of 2002. What the Bulgarians were in 1994, South Korea is in 2002, in more ways than one. And then the finals, Brazil beat Germany. Not that surprising, but what is surprising was that this was literally the very first meeting between the two countries, even though up till that point, the two countries had like 7 finals in between them. And even though Germany lost, you could really see Germany becoming the country that won the World Cup in 2014, because back in 1994, they weren't very good. They were beaten by Bulgaria. They had just reunified. But by 2002, they were really becoming a formidable force. And it was also in this World Cup that Cafu became the first player ever to feature in 3 consecutive finals. Not even Pele did that, even though he's the only player to win 3 World Cups. And I guess you could say this was sort of Ronaldo's redemption arc, because in 1994 he won, but he didn't play because he was so young. In 1998 he was injured and had a seizure. And in 2002 he finally got his dream, which is to play at the World Cup and win it at the same time. So I think that is truly heartwarming. So what can be said about this World Cup? Except for the fact that I guess you could say it's the first truly modern World Cup because, well, first of all, it's the first in the 21st century, second ever international competition in the 21st century after the Winter Olympics held earlier that year. It was the first to sort of update its drug test to include EPO and blood tests, because before then you had drug tests, but they were using primitive methods and urine samples. It was the first to be co-hosted by 2 countries, showing a more technological interconnectedness, because initially, in the first World Cups, you couldn't get a co-hosting because there was a time delay, stuff like that. It's also first Asian host, which shows for the first time that the World Cup is moving away from just Europe and South America to incorporate other areas as well. Not quite global yet, because it hasn't been hosted by Africa yet, although it will be 8 years after this World Cup. And you can also see that the refereeing is becoming more stringent, as is shown by Rivaldo actually becoming the first player to be penalized for simulation. And that is to say that when he was taking a penalty, I think it was a corner kick this one time, he was hit in the leg with a ball, and then he screamed and covered his face as if he was hit in the face. But anyone could see that he was hit in the leg and not in the face with a ball. So unless you have complex regional pain syndrome, that wouldn't happen. So he got penalized for that. And that was just an interesting little tidbit from this World Cup. So yeah, that was basically what the 2002 World Cup was all about. If you liked this video, then like, comment, and subscribe. I'll talk about a different World Cup in the next video. Bye, guys.